This morning, I want to be vulnerable. Is that cool? All right, cool. He stumbles over to me, almost in a drunken stupor. I'm 17 years old, and this guy that I'm staring at is homeless. He looks at me, and he waves in a signal to come over to him. I'm standing with my friends at the time, and I'm standing outside of the alternative school that I was going to at that time. It's funny because this is the same day I was fed up and I said, man, this is the day I'm going to drop out of school. I'm not going back there because all of my social pressures stemming from my house have led me to this point. And I go over to this homeless man, random. And he says, young man, do you go to this school behind you? And I say, yeah. He says, stay in school. Whatever you do, please stay in school, because if you don't, he points at himself with trash hanging from his beard and he says, you'll end up like me. This guy was in his mid-50s and he looked at me. And would you believe if I told you that that's the first man that I ever heard tell me that I would be a leader someday? A homeless man standing outside of an alternative school. And I said, me, a leader? He says, yeah, you, a leader. He says you have two options. Like literally, you could change your path and your trajectory and go down the right path by committing yourself to something that will be worthwhile so you could become the leader that you were destined to be, or you could end up like, and he points at himself one more time. I got to ask you something this morning. Have you ever had to make commitment your lifeline? Like, have you ever been in a place where commitment was the very thing that you had to choose? See, for me, growing up in Atlanta, on the southwest side of Atlanta, I only had two options. It was either get myself together despite growing up in a household where I was fatherless, despite growing up around abuse and violence and gang activity, despite all of these norms that was normal to me in my environment, I had to make a choice. Either I was going to commit myself to doing much better, or I was going to succumb to ending up being dead, locked up, or in jail. You see, that day in front of that school, my life changed. Something on the inside of me spoke to me, because for the very first time, I heard that I could be a leader, and it was from somebody who was also broken and looked down upon and marginalized and living on the margins of society. And I learned something, that I had to do something. I had to commit myself to more than what I was accustomed to. And I made that commitment, and I changed my life. I went back to school and I graduated. I got my education. I went on to go to college to complete 4 degrees. I got married young to my best friend. I then went on to have 2 kids that are the apple of my eye. And then weird things started happening. Like, I was invited back to the very youth detention center that I was locked up in to give a speech to people who were also in the same situation that I was once in. I was then invited back to the same high school that I was kicked out of to give talks to kids that are in this high school who were fighting for their very lives, being in environments faced with the same things that I was faced with. And then it blows my mind. I ended up becoming the very mentor to a police officer's kids who locked me up when I was a teenager. My life began to change because I learned something. Commitment is born out of survival. I'm literally talking about the type of commitment where you don't have another choice. It's either this or nothing. It's this, I'm going to do this idea. I'm going to become this thing. I'm going to achieve everything that I set my mind to achieve, because I have to commit myself, because there's no bridge for me to cross back over. Commitment is born out of survival. How many of you have ever been in places in your life where you had to commit and you had no other option? I'm talking about the type of commitment that says, you know what? That I'm going to do whatever it takes. This type of commitment is born out of resilience. This type of commitment becomes your very lifeline. You see, I learned something, that there's a difference between interest and commitment. You see, when you're interested in something, you'll only do it when it's convenient. But when you're committed to something, you'll do it because it's necessary. It's a vital aspect to your life. And I had to commit myself to being better and doing better and turning my life around because I knew I wanted to relate to people who are in this world, who were standing on the fringes and the margins of society, who were broken just like me. People who we walk past every single day, that are on the street corners, that we ride by, that we turn a blind eye to. I wanted to relate to them because I too had the same type of brokenness and ambiguity that I was wrestling with. And I had to commit myself to a point where I could get on the other side and then give myself back unto the very thing that I arose from. You see, I wanted to connect with the misfits, the people who are living under bridges, the people who were just like me when I was 16 years old, that had to live out of the trunk of their car and go to high school and have teachers tell me that I wouldn't amount to anything because they were looking at my behavior that was stemming from my social issues and not addressing the root issue, which was my poverty and my dysfunction. You see, I remember that homeless guy telling me something. He says, man, there are two types of people in this world. Either there are accumulators or there are distributors. You see, accumulators, they live their entire lives looking to amass a bunch of stuff, where at the end of their life, they can look back at their lives and the only thing that they can account for is all the stuff they accumulated. He says, but young man, they're also distributors. You see, distributors see themselves as channels of goodness in this world, and they commit themselves to a life of generosity. You have to choose which person you're going to become. And for many years, I engaged people all throughout my 20s, people who are living on the fringes of society. I went back to school, got a couple master's degrees, got myself educated because at the end of my life, I wanted to look back at my life and understand that I gave myself to something greater than a paycheck, to something greater than just amassing a bunch of stuff. And in other words, I found something that was worth more giving my life to than what I had been involved in or experienced. And then I figured out that commitment makes things clear. That if you commit yourself to one thing long enough, that clarity will come as a result of you just committing yourself to this one thing. See, my stepfather told me this early on. He says, you got to keep your vision solid, but your plans fluid. This is the type of commitment that when you commit yourself long enough to that one thing, that the universe or the energy or whatever you identify with will reveal to you the clarity as to how you're supposed to use your talents, your gifts, and your abilities to serve that very purpose. And I'm just afraid that many of us find ourselves wanting to commit to something, but we don't commit long enough to gain the clarity. You see, without commitment, you cannot have the depth in anything, whether it be in a relationship, a business, a hobby, or an idea. You see, years after giving myself to this work, I became very clear that I was supposed to give myself a little more. And so my wife and I started this organization called Love Beyond Walls. It's an organization that literally is committed to making the stories of people who are just like me and just like so many other people around this country living on the margins, to make them visible. You know, the hardest thing that we fight in this world are the false perceptions of those who are living in impoverished situations. And we jotted our notes down, and we started the forming process, and we got this space, right? And it started off as something we'll just do on the weekends. My wife was working and I was working, and this is the thing that we were going to commit ourselves to because we had enough margin on our plates to give ourselves over and above our normal routines. But hardship followed. I remember being called into the office of my employer. The gentleman asked me to sit down because he wanted to talk to me. He says, with his aggressive voice, "Man, you should allow me to take over this organization." And I declined because where we were sitting, we were in the suburbs. We were in this suburban bubble with tons of privilege. And I say, man, like, that's not where my heart is. My heart is to give myself to the people who are literally living on the margins. He had no resume of where I had come from. You know, 2 weeks later, he calls me into his office and he says, "I heard you got a building and you're doing this on the weekend, and I really wanted to work with you. But we're going to have to let you go. Maybe you should give yourself 100% to that." I'll never forget being in the hallway with my son, painting the wall of the building that we had just leased with no budget, no guide, no one to help me translate these ideas that we had of using storytelling in a way to mobilize people, to engage people literally living on the margins of society. And what was I to do? I had to do something. And so I did what I knew to do when I learned about survival. I learned that commitment literally severs all ties with options of compromise and grows your leadership. You see, in order to fulfill what it is that you're called or purposed or destined to do, you have to literally marry your ideas and divorce your past. I had to make a demarcation in my heart and in my mind and my ideas and my work. And I decided that I was going to give my total self to bringing this idea into the world. I had to listen deeper to the stories that I was encountering all those years of serving among those experiencing homelessness and poverty, not only in this city, but across this country. I was in survival mode, but I had this idea in my mind that I was going to commit myself and sever all ties with compromise, because whenever you're faced with hardship, there's always this option in your heart that you may carry around to say, maybe I should just go back and do that. Well, if you truly believe in what you're called and created to do, if you truly believe in your gifts and your talents and your abilities, you'll sever all ties and say, you know what? I'm going to commit myself to continue onward because this is the very reason I exist. And I saw change, because instead of running away from need, I started running towards need and launching these demonstrative type campaigns. Like when I started the organization, I lived under the bridge right downtown by Grady as a homeless person with the permission of my family for an entire week to document these stories, to educate the general public about what it is that people have to literally go to when they're in survival mode, second by second and minute by minute. I ate out of trash cans with my friends experiencing homelessness. I was put out of shelters. I begged 427 people who thought I was homeless for $1 and only got 11. I connected with my friends and I helped him beg for the very funds that would provide money for his medication because he had no health care. I remember walking across the city 31 miles to bring attention to homelessness survival, because I wanted to bring this to the surface. Poverty is something that we do not talk about, and because it's touchy, it messes with people's excess and affluence and privilege. And I wanted to do it in a way that shines a light on the very people that we should care about in this city and in this country. And so I did that, and at the end of 31 miles, we got 20 people off of the streets. I remember working in schools where I would meet a third grader, and literally the third grader would tell me that she had been bullied and picked on because she only had one outfit. What do you mean one outfit? Yeah, one outfit. She doesn't have a change of clothes at the house. And I remember leaving that school in tears because she had nowhere to wash her clothes. And I had to ask myself, who knows about this? Who knows about the stories that people face every single day? And then who cares? And so I would wear one outfit for 90 days straight to bring attention to Title I school kids who are living in impoverished situations. And at the end of that campaign, would build closets in schools so people who go to those schools who are kids would have access to clean clothes so they could connect with their lessons. It was about putting myself on the line and running towards the need and not running away from it. And then I lived on top of a bus for 30 days. And we converted it into Atlanta's first mobile makeovers unit, where we converted this bus into a mobile barbershop, closet, and hygiene station. That when my friends couldn't walk 17 miles or 12 miles just to get to a shelter, to like stand in the restroom, to try to bathe themselves or groom themselves, that we could pull up on them and they could literally be transformed on the spot so they could have their dignity affirmed. And many of us believe that we have the right to give people dignity. That's a lie. The only thing that we could do with people is affirm the dignity that's inherent already on the inside of them. And these campaigns started generating interest and mobilizing people, and we converted that bus. And then a lady knocks on the door at our center in College Park, and she walked 7 miles just for a bag of groceries. And I say, you know what? I'm about to walk from Atlanta all the way to Washington, D.C. to bring attention to poverty in this country, because there are over 150 million people who are living below the poverty line or near it. So many people are just one paycheck away, and we started these conversations around this idea of how do we address systemic poverty, converting this into a film called Voiceless. And then I walked from Atlanta, Georgia to Memphis just recently this year and ended on April 4th, 2018 at the Lorraine Motel, and was able to stand on stage in concert with everybody there that was there to celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and say, this is what we should do. Poor people matter. Poor people matter when single moms have to walk to centers just for diapers. Poor people matter when little children are eating spaghetti sauce in replace of baby food. Poor people matter when people are getting put out of restaurants because they smell and they can't get access to jobs because they don't have access to clothes or access to the right support systems in this country. I wanted to commit myself to something that will lift up the very voices that were being voiceless in our country. And I learned something, that if we don't compromise and we stay committed, that commitment will lead to innovation. That if you stick with something long enough, that needs will transform into opportunities. And we would meet people that we would hire and get jobs and provide shelter for. We would turn these negatives that people saw as negatives in our society as opportunities to commit ourselves to these things, to continue to create solutions. One man said that we need agitators in our society because needs present opportunities to grow. And I'm just afraid that most times we give up before we reach an idea that can be used to change and transform lives. And I refuse to give up. And in the last 4 years, we've gotten over 300 people off of the streets through mobilizing people in our awareness campaigns, and we're just getting started. But I have to be honest, because there is a reality about this work. When you commit yourself to this type of work, I must share that it's invasive. It's always with you. It will keep you up at night. It will tire you out. It will cause you to worry unnecessarily. And there will be times when you will want to quit. And if I'm just honest, you will want to quit, but you must know. But there will always be times of joy. There will always be times of laughter and compassion and victory. See, we've got to learn how to balance our passion to maintain a healthy commitment. And so when people ask me, Terence, how do you keep going? How do you remain resilient? How do you commit yourself to something over and over and over again? And I simply respond by saying, I keep going because I hate seeing people live on the streets, and we have abandoned buildings all around the city. I hate going to bed knowing that children will go to sleep tonight without a meal, and we just had a local restaurant throw away pounds of food. I hate that many people have false perspectives about poor people that they have never even met. I keep going because I'm tired of the disparities continuing to hold people back from overcoming systemic poverty. When I can look at a man in the eyes and say, we're going to walk with you until you get a job, that's why I commit. When I can look at somebody and say, you've never owned transportation, and I know you have to get to work and you can't afford public transportation, we're going to walk with you until you get transportation and solve that issue. I commit because I can look at a child in a child's eyes and tell them that I understand where you are and I understand where you have the potential to be. Do you remember why you started? See, every morning I wake up, I allow the words of Martin Luther King to fuel my mind and heart when he says, if a man or woman has not discovered something that he or she will die for, then they're not fit to live. See, I allow these raw emotions to literally help me to understand that commitment has no expiration date. You see, most people give up when things aren't going according to their time frame. But you must not allow the time that it takes to happen to dictate how much or how long you are willing to give. So if I have to march, I'll march. If I have to climb a tree, I'll climb a tree. If I have to literally set myself on fire to ensure that another homeless person or person that has not eaten has transitional foundations in their presence or meal, I'll do it. If I have to commit myself without an expiration date, so a person who is poor is looked at differently and affirmed, then so be it, because I was that person. And at the end of the day, I've learned commitment has to be personal because absolutely no one will commit for you. And I want to leave you with a couple of questions and a thought. What are you willing to continue to commit to? How will you continue to commit when no one else is cheering you on? People, you must remember why you started and remember that we all have an expiration date, but not our legacies, not the things that we can build to make this world better. Because at the end of the day, we should all want to go to our graves empty. We should all want to go to our graves empty, having used every single gift and skill set that we've been given to make this world better. Commit yourself.